I'm Ashton Addison from Blockwest Capital for Investment Pitch Media and the Crypto Coin Show. And today on Blockchain Interviews, once again, we have back Joseph Weinberg, co-founder of Shyft Network. Joseph, welcome back to the show. Thank you so much for taking the time, and it's a pleasure to see you again.
Great to see you as well, Ashton. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. So much has happened in the space since we last spoke. I would love to, there's so much to cover, but let's just start with, for the people that haven't seen our previous interviews, what is Shyft Network? What is your team focused on in the solutions that you're driving into the blockchain and cryptocurrency space?
Yeah, so Shyft is a multi-layered kind of public blockchain protocol. It is a layer 1 and it is a smart contract layer 2. It's really focused around identity and identity related use cases. We kind of look at it as what's called a general purpose attestation architecture. Really, it's around how you provide data across a variety of different use cases, what we call trusted data architecture, in order to build a variety of use cases around users, counterparty interactions, and discovery architecture. So whether it be an identity from a government perspective, decentralized identity, more kind of a traditional smart contract, attribution into a variety of other areas.
Mm-hmm. Wow, so much to cover. When you build an architecture that's sort of multi-purpose, especially as the cryptocurrency industry is just expanding so quickly, it's hard to keep up, especially on the compliance side, because it's like a constant battle of like the innovators and the cypherpunks creating new technology, and then the regulators trying to keep up.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, and you mentioned some important things there. Obviously, digital identity, I think it's going to be super important moving forward as more people have all of their information on there. But there's also, KYC, AML, other compliance, governance, regulation. You have the FATF. How do you focus on all of these different things all at the same time? And is there a priority?
Yeah, I think the cool thing is that everything kind of starts with identity, right? Even if you're running a Bitcoin transaction or an Ethereum transaction, your keys are effectively an obfuscated form of identity, right? And so everything that we had designed and built was really around this concept of there's this core identity, these are public and private keys, and then all the things that we build up from a general purpose perspective allow us to say, okay, we can target a use case or another use case, build small modifications to it, and use that infrastructure really, really quickly. And that's kind of been a really successful model, I think. We've also looked at it as what is the core way to bootstrap identity? And I think that, people have been trying this for years, whether it's civic, there's so many different approaches to this. We always kind of looked at it as saying, regulations will effectively force adoption. And so if we can kind of make sure that we have infrastructure for the crypto ecosystem that maintains privacy, decentralization, and security at the user level, and provide that to the largest exchanges as an example, they already hold all of our user data. Exchanges are the biggest onboarders of customers. And so if we can work with them in really, really interesting ways, we can kind of bootstrap that decentralized identity infrastructure and solve this huge problem of FATF and travel requirements and KYC sharing and stuff. So that's kind of where we've chosen to focus, work within the ecosystem and allow that to be a scalable architecture in the future for other applications. So yeah, that's kind of how we look at prioritization. Very
cool. And I'm glad you mentioned that about the exchanges. I think a lot of people don't realize that, that's where everything is happening in terms of if you're putting your identity in there to have compliance. If somebody is, say somebody gets hacked and some hackers have some funds, they're going to try to liquidate them. They're probably going to try to send it to the exchange. How does the exchange know if the funds are legit, or if it's from, counterfeiting, or if it's from hacking, and if the person is legit and who they say they are? And I know that your team's been working with exchanges and regulators for a while, and that you've developed out this FATF as well, which I think would be helpful for the audience if you could sort of explain that a little bit and how that fits into the transactions they make.
Yes, the Financial Action Task Force is effectively an intergovernmental organization. They are effectively made up of countries all around the world. And what they do is they write universal standards. So, what is KYC? How do you define it? how do you make it regulated in the context of all these different countries as a framework, all these different attributes. They're kind of like a global regulator, if you will. And so it's a way of universalizing, this requirement. And so they basically, of course, deal with terrorist financing, a lot of the bad stuff that happens in the financial system. And then they, of course, put their sights on crypto about 3.5 years ago, and basically came to all of us industry and said, we're going to implement something called the travel rule. This is the requirement that banks have today when you're sending a Swift transaction. I'm sending identity information with the money. And in the traditional system, there's a reason for that. They kind of just said, we're going to slap this identity requirement into the crypto space. So if I'm moving a Bitcoin transaction from me to you on Binance to Bitfinex, we now need to move Ashton and Joseph's identity information with those transactions. And that's a big departure from how crypto works today, right? Like, we don't really need that identity requirement. But of course, regulations are coming. And so that's kind of the where we are today in the centralized exchange land. And so we've been working on a solution with them called Veriscope for the last 2.5 years as a solution to this. It's really simply put a decentralized version of Swift. Swift is what moves crypto or payments in the traditional system. And it really acts as this discovery and coordination layer for any crypto transaction, allows exchanges to figure out who each other is on the other side. How do we make sure we don't, diminish privacy of the user? How do we make sure we don't centralize the ecosystem in a lot of really terrible ways, which is what the financial system kind of does through compliance, and makes it so that we have this open data architecture to transmit information all around the world safely, securely, and maintaining decentralization. So that's kind of the focus and what has been going on that side of the initiative. We have about 45 to 50 exchanges today. Financial institutions that are working on the project as well. And actually, we're starting to see a lot of third-party applications right now starting to build new solutions on top of this general purpose infrastructure for this data transmission requirement. So really cool stuff. Yeah.
Very cool. And yeah, to have all those exchanges onboarded already is a great step in the right direction. I'm curious though about that. You mentioned attaching identity information. A lot of people already have their know your customer information in the exchange. So that would be easy, I guess, to transfer to another exchange. But does the same go for if you're withdrawing to a private wallet, or if you just have a private wallet and you're sending it to somebody else in another country, or maybe you're just sending it to another wallet of your own? Does that apply as well?
No, luckily not. And that was the big thing that we were arguing for to make sure it didn't happen. KYC requirements are only in regards to entities that are regulated, and so the big battle that we've had as industry, veterans in the space, is to make sure that stays that way, and that I don't attach identity directly to my personal wallet. Because it doesn't really help, and we think that's a overstep from a regulatory perspective. And so this is only as it pertains to exchange transactions.
It's interesting to note about the exchanges, a centralized powerhouse of information, and they also have everybody's personal information. And you mentioned there, protecting people's privacy. We've seen in the past exchanges get hacked, but it's always the coins were withdrawn or the money was lost. But they also have everybody's personal information. And you talked about creating a Swift that's decentralized. I know that the crypto people like to talk about how Swift was broken and the centralized system, it doesn't work very well, and we need a crypto version of it. I'm guessing that it's not just the same thing but decentralized, but there's also been a lot of tweaks there to fix it and hopefully be more like cryptocurrency and transferring Bitcoin around the world really easily, I would think.
Yeah, it's kind of this idea that we tried to implement the same approach, which is not your keys, not your coins. And so we use the public and private keys and the signatures of Ethereum and different types of security models on the public and private key side. We use that as effectively a way of saying, I'm an exchange, I'm about to do a withdrawal. I'm writing this request for information, this encrypted transaction, requesting information on some Bitcoin withdrawal. And then there's a bunch of smart contracts that mediate this kind of rule set or the requirement between how these counterparties find each other, discover each other, transmit data on some user, request users' consent from a GDPR perspective. So they use the public and private keys to sign messages. So it really like eliminates any type of central coordination. And it means that the users still have ultimate control over users' data. So like you can't move my data unless I agree to it. And we know that this is done over a P2P network, fully encrypted and very distributed across everyone. So it's a really like elegant architecture to solving this and a variety of other problems. So.
That's great to know. And you know, we've been, even just with our interview show here, we've been speaking to Shyft for years now, and I know you've been working on the platform for a long time. And I feel like the industry has grown so much since we started speaking. You know, exponentially more people trading now, and way more exchanges that didn't exist before. How has your team balanced, you know, the growth of the industry and like trying to build compliance software that you know will keep up for 5 years from now when there's again exponentially more people in the industry? Yeah,
we kind of took this like 10-year view, right? Like when we started this, you know, 5 years ago almost, everyone was like, this is crazy, this doesn't make any sense, like there's no way this is going to happen, right? And I think only over the last like 2 years did it start becoming clear, and really only over the last year did people go, oh, okay, this actually really makes sense. And the cool thing is like we have about a 4 to 5 year build ahead of everyone now, and so we kept it open, we kept it generalized, and we're kind of helping define the rules with regulators as we go, because we've already thought about this for so long. And so, you know, it's great to see the users start to come and test, and, you know, the exchanges are starting to work through how this thing actually functions. And we look at this towards, you know, we've built infrastructure for DeFi, we built things for NFTs, as we really just see this world that, you know, won't stop from a regulatory perspective, but we can balance it. So it's exciting to see it all like happening, and, you know, hate to say we told you so, but here now. So.
Love it. Yeah. And I like how you mentioned building out the protocol for DeFi and NFTs. I also just recently saw that you created the FATF compliance layer for Polkadot as well. That's super exciting. I've been looking at the parachain lease offerings. Polkadot's fairly early stage in launching their ecosystem compared to Ethereum. Are you staying on top of that and all of these other trends about like new up and coming protocols?
Very hard to. It's like amazing explosion of innovation across everything. Like we kind of looked at it more as like we really care about the applications and the use cases. You know, this is EVM infrastructure, so any place that runs Ethereum, like virtual machine compatibility, you know, talking about Solana, talking about Avalanche, talking about Polkadot, like we want Shyft to be everywhere, whether it's layer 1s or layer 2s. And the cool thing is we built this architecture so that you can be on any one of these systems, and your assets, your identity information, all these rules work no matter where they are. And so we really see this as like a cross-chain interoperable world. There's not about competition at the base layer. We care more about application accessibility on the secondary or tertiary layers. And so that's kind of where we're at. And as use cases come to us or the customers come, we'll continue to deploy across more places. And so, yeah, you should see a few more deployments in this coming year. You know, more use cases and stuff on that end too.
Definitely looking forward to that. And you know, you mentioned at the very beginning how it all really fits into like a digital identity, right? And we've been talking about digital identity and blockchain space and how it's going to be great because we'll be able to own our own identity and we'll be able to use it on cross-platform, cross-country. Who knows where, you know, what the limits are? But I've yet to see, you know, a login where it has one of those, you know, sign in with Facebook, sign in with Google, sign in with your actual digital identity on the blockchain. You know, when is that going to come out? When, you know, my grandma will be able to use her blockchain identity to log into multiple exchanges.
You know, it's funny. I think that was like our core premise, that we thought differently than every person who's tried to build identity. And I think there's a reason why it hasn't worked. Like for a good reason why a lot of, you know, mobile wallets didn't work for so long. Like you really need to make the product so much better than the wallet you have in your pocket today. And that took a decade, right? It takes time because like people are just like, this isn't that much more useful than the credit card I have today, right? As an example. And I think identity is largely that. Like there is no forced requirement to do so. And so the user experience has to be just 10x better. And so that's why we looked at it and we said like, listen, regulations will force adoption here. We don't necessarily like it. We're going to try to make sure privacy is maintained through that process. But this is something that actually forcibly requires adoption. And that's a really interesting model to piggyback off of, right? When you think of it from a strategic bootstrapping of a decentralized identity network, that's about as interesting as it gets. And so we think that that's probably the models that will continue to push identity. And that's kind of where, of course, like we're really focused. And so it's not necessarily the best. No one necessarily loves regulation. You know, the Wild Wild West was really fun, but institutional adoption is coming and we got to, catch up with the times. And so in that context, we think that, using this type of architecture and infrastructure to seed these systems in a time where regulations are forcing, change is probably where this actually happens. And so then we look at things off of that system: credit, reputation infrastructure, credit scoring architectures, institutional DeFi architecture. There's a ton of things that now become possible through this like identity KYC backed identity primitive on these networks like Shyft. So, yeah.
Well said. Yeah, I think you're right. It's going to take time, but when it does, and it is 10x better, then I'll be the first one to start using it.
There we go. You and me both.
Now, there's so many things that we've spoken about, and I know your team's working on multiple things, but I would love to get a glimpse of some of the things that your team's working on for 2022 with Shyft Network and what you expect to come out with.
Yeah, so we've been doing a lot of testing with exchanges over the last year or so, and we're really just trying to get that right. Like I think when you think about the amount of transactions that have to become compliant, it's one of the biggest infrastructures that will like kind of be deployed in the space. It's over 5 million transactions a day, which is like bigger than Ethereum, by far. And so getting this right and from a security perspective is like incredibly difficult and challenging, and in almost 200 countries. And so that's been a big focus in making sure that thing works and lasts as long as the space will, hopefully forever, as long as we don't get banned as an ecosystem. That's like a big focus. We have a lot of infrastructure that'll get deployed against that. So I'd say this is in January and February, a lot of rollouts across that on the exchange side. We have a lot of financial institutions working on global network deployments, which will come out in the next few months too. And this is really this idea that like we're crossing the chasm between the crypto wild wild west and this institutional adoptive curve, and so how institutions started adopting this regulatory infrastructure just accelerates crypto adoption across the space, right? And so so that's kind of the goal and the mission we've had. We have other really cool pretty big tech companies that'll be doing a lot of interesting stuff in the next little while as well. And we've been really focused on an institutional DeFi layer for, I would say, the last year. So that'll start rolling out into Q1. And this is again about how do we bring more people into the space. So whether it becomes institutional staking, like on the NETH2 side, institutional bond markets, we're kind of building this layer on top of all of crypto today that gives us this opt-in compliance primitive so that any application in DeFi can maintain composability, maintain the exact structure that DeFi has, but allow for all this capital that sits on the sidelines to become available to use this ecosystem. And so that's the biggest initiative I'd say we have internally now. And yeah, that'll be definitely in Q1 of this coming year, and other stuff as well. But those are the big focuses right now.
Great. Thanks, Joseph. Looking forward to that. And for the viewers that want to follow along with all of these updates and just learn more about Shyft, what is the best way for them to learn more?
Yeah, at Shyft Network on Twitter. We just launched a Discord, so we're starting to really focus on the community side. I think that's at Shyft Network as well, on the Discord side. And so really starting to kind of focus on the retail area as we've now finished a lot of the institutional side of things. Telegram, I think, is the same. I'm at Joseph Weinberg on Twitter. Feel free to reach out anytime. So.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Joseph. Great to have you back on the show. All the best with Shyft in 2022, and I know that we will follow up again in the near future.
Absolutely, Ashton. Thanks for having me.